when people ask for a one line summary of the book, I've been saying that exhibit explores what you'd risk to pursue your core desires, what you might give up for what you want the most. And there was a first question that fascinated me, and that question was why is it that I feel so strongly pushed by the world, by the zeitgeist, certainly by my family, to want certain things, and pretty much as strongly pushed to not want other things. And the things that I feel especially pushed to want include being a daughter of, a mother of, a sister of, a community member of, a friend of. And the things I feel pressured not to want, or to at least hide my desire for, are include anything from my body, sex, food, certainly ambition, certainly artistic ambition. Even just a day, if I just want a day alone, that feels like something that sort of has to be defended or perhaps hidden. And I became fascinated by that because on the one hand, it's really important to me to be to be a very active community member. My friends are of great importance to me, as is my family. But what is so dangerous about me wanting for myself? And then so that was really, I'd say, the first spark.
Okay. And then you went out to the ballet, and what was it about ballet that spoke to you?
So it was my first time attending the ballet as an adult. And that was back in, oh God, what is time? That was back in like 2014. And it was, as I was watching, I had what amounted to an ecstatic experience. The dancers on stage, somehow it felt as though their bodies, cell to cell, were talking with my body, cell to cell. Almost,
Wait, but what does that mean? Like, their bodies were talking to your body. You felt it internally.
I felt it internally, and it bypassed my reasoning, intellectualizing brain. So it felt as though my body was almost mirroring what was happening on the stage, responding to it. And I was wrapped. And the ballet itself was by Alexei Ratmansky, called the Shostakovich trilogy. So gorgeous. Anyone who can see it, I'd recommend it. But I just the yeah, and then I was fascinated and puzzled by the experience. And I've had this experience with visual art for sure. The experience where where one is wrapped and and not exactly sure what is going on. I think as a writer, as a reader, I'm used to a certain kind of artistic experience, and less familiar with what happened when I watched ballet. And then from then on, I got obsessed. Like I watched so much ballet. I read so much about ballet in the course of researching this book. I ended up taking ballet and choreography classes. I interviewed ballerinas and dancers, and yeah.
Wow. I mean, that's like a very high level of commitment to actually take ballet, talk to ballerinas. You obviously are going to ballet. Like, what did you learn from those experiences that found its way into the novel?
Oh, there was so much. I will say, I have to say, the ballet classes were extremely elementary. Because most people who dance ballet, they start at like 4 years old. It starts so early. It's such a part of your body. And actually, the first draft of this book, I tried to tell the ballet. I tried to tell the novel from the ballerina's point of view. Um, and I realized actually that, at least for me, I'm a very, whenever I'm stuck on a scene or not sure what to do, I try very hard to forcibly eject myself out of my body into a character's body. And I ask myself, what am I now feeling? Just how is what am I thirsty? Are my jeans uncomfortable? Just like the basics of what my body is up to. And I found that I couldn't quite do that to the extent I wanted with a ballerina. And I think that part of that was because a ballerina, especially a ballerina who's dancing at the level that Lydia, my novel's central ballerina, is dancing. Her whole body is shaped by ballet in a way that I could not quite. white and habit. And so that was fascinating. The choreography class I took, I was there and I essentially just went as a watcher because, I've never choreographed a dance before. And something that fascinated me about that was, as the other people, so, the teacher would give them an assignment, like whatever, like come up with a 5-minute sequence of moves for a dance. And people, if it were a group of writers, everyone would go to the table, get out their pens or laptops and start like writing or typing. Like it would be very predictable. The choreographers, they were thinking with their bodies, they'd flop on the ground, they went into splits, they'd stand up, they'd start moving, and yeah, it was just like such a different way of thinking than what I'm used to seeing and knowing.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the last time we spoke, I think at the end of the conversation, as I usually do, I asked you what you were working on, and you talked about this book. And like all authors tend to be when it comes to that kind of question, you were a little bit cryptic. You're like, it's about a photographer and a dancer, I think is what you told me. Something like that, And as I listen to you, it occurs to me how like diametrically opposite like ballet as an art form is from writing, like this very cerebral, static, like inert, inward, quiet discipline that writing tends to be versus the embodied, incredibly physically demanding work of ballet. It's punishing work. Ballerinas are notoriously tough and often dealing with injuries and even dancing through injuries that would, I think sideline a lesser person. But that was part of the allure for you, I imagine, as somebody who is a writer and is inward, looking at these people who are so physical and so embodied in their work. Like,
Mm, that's a great question. I'm not sure that, on the one hand, yes, it fascinates me. And yeah, this is in the novel, but there's a point when Lydia mentions, that while she was dancing, she broke a toe, and she just keeps dancing because that's what you do in ballet. You just keep dancing. If you're at all capable of continuing to dance, you keep dancing. And there's she's dancing a part that involves a lot of jumping up and down on that foot, that injured foot, and she just keeps doing it with her broken foot. I mean, not a broken foot, her broken toe. And that's and that was inspired by a real story. That this is standard for ballet, for people who dance ballet. I think I'm certainly fascinated by the physicality of it. I'm also, there are other ways in which it's so different from writing. So in ballet, especially in classical ballet, one doesn't talk back. One doesn't question what you're told. It's an extremely disciplined art, that is traditionally very top down. And so if a teacher says, if in a class, somebody tells you to do something, you do it. Like you don't. There's no there's very little space for disagreement, for instance. And so in that way, it's so different from writing, right? With writing a novel, certainly, where it's kind of everything is up to you, and anything that goes wrong is entirely your fault, really. And yeah.
but
But
you have like an authorial authority that is maybe lacking for the ballerina who has to kind of take orders essentially.
yeah, and of course, there's so much space inside of that discipline, inside those restrictions for how you yourself as an individual are going to dance. So I don't want to. So it's not that. Yeah, but the other thing is, it's not unusual. It's not at all unusual for ballerinas to have to retire when they're in their 20s. 30s, definitely. people who are still dancing ballet past 40, that's quite rare because of how hard it is on your body. And that's something I was thinking a lot about too. Lydia, the ballerina in Exhibit, she's a extremely accomplished ballerina. She's a principal, which is the highest level she can reach, and she knows how little time she has. She's 25 in the book, and she knows that she just doesn't have that much more time, before she might have to stop. And that's just a condition of ballet, which of course isn't quite as true for writers who, in theory, barring an accident that affects your brain in some way, essentially, or an illness, we can keep writing until we drop dead. And yeah.
That's one of the advantages, one of the few advantages of being a writer. You can keep going. But I do feel like, I mean, I'm approaching 50. I'm like, I don't feel like I've even begun to scratch the surface. I have a lot of work left to do. That's how I feel about it. I think a lot of people feel that way. And like, it's nice that the possibility exists. It would be sad, I think, especially if you really love it,
Yeah.
to have such a low ceiling on your ability to do this thing that you love. It's over when you're 28 or whatever.
Right. And so the ferocity of the love that people have for ballet who decide to make it their lives, is is mm, is endlessly fascinating to me, because yeah, that like a bad injury could take you out. Um, you're living on a much shorter time schedule than people who don't have to retire, who don't most likely have to retire by the time they're 40, for instance. And yeah, because we have plenty of writers right until the day they drop dead. And I certainly hope that that's what we're going to be able to do. Knock on wood.
Yeah. Well, before we get any further, let's give listeners the kind of broad setup of this novel. We've talked a lot about Lydia, the ballerina, but this is very much a relationship novel, multiple relationships, but principal among them is the relationship between Jin Han, who is a photographer, married to a man named Philip,
Mhm.
and then enter Lydia, this ballerina. The kind of novel opens with their meeting. Jin and Lydia meet at a party in Marin. Can you just talk about the setup of this book and the relationships at the heart of it?
Sure, that's a great question. So when the novel starts, Jin, who's a photographer, has been married to her husband for a little while, Philip. They've been together since college. He's essentially her first boyfriend, her first partner. And they're at a crossroads because they had agreed from the very start that they weren't going to have children, and that neither was interested. And Philip wakes up one day, and he wakes up and he realizes, oh God, I do want children. And Jin, quite ferociously, is certain that she doesn't want children. So this is one of those. This is one of those things where it's really hard to genuinely compromise. There's no such thing as half a child, and one child is not a compromise by
Right.
any means. And so now they don't know what to do. They love each other very much, and they're not sure what to do next. And then it's at this juncture that they go to this party, and Jin meets Lydia Jung, this very accomplished star ballerina, and they stay up at the party all night talking. And part of what draws Jin and Lydia to each other, so they're both artists. They're both in a state of some creative frustration. So Jin hasn't been able to take a photo. She had a first exhibition that was quite prominent. And then after that, for a variety of reasons, she hasn't been able to take a photo she can even bear to keep around for a solid year, which is a long time. Lydia is seriously injured, and for the first time in her life, can't dance the way she wants to, and is recuperating, and is just waiting to get back to who she is and wants to be. And so they're both at this sort of in this lull with their work. And so, and part of what draws them to each other is perhaps the first thing that really pulls them together is the strength of their ambition and their specifically the ambition for their art. And they talk about it with each other. They're open with each other that night in a way that that can be hard for that in a way that can be hard for people to be open, I think. And I've thought a lot about the ways in which, you know, so many of my friends, so many, as I'm sure is true of you, so many of my writer and artist friends are so ambitious. Definitely including women. And I've talked about this a lot with close women artist friends. I'm ambitious for my work, in terms of what I wanted to be able to do with it, in terms of just like what I'm capable of doing on the page. And it still feels so dangerous to say that, I mean, I've been saying it, I've just been saying it, but it feels dangerous to say I'm an ambitious woman. It feels like code for, I mean, it's not even code. A friend and I were joking because their friend said, isn't that code for unlikable women? And I said, is it even a code? It just, it already carries so many negative connotations. But Jin and Lydia are honest with each other about the breadth, strength, and depth of their ambition. And then from then on, they also realize that night that they have some overlap in terms of what they're interested, what their bodies are interested in doing sexually. And so, and then from then on, they become friends. And then I don't think I'm giving anything away if I say that. And then they become more than friends.
And then they become more than friends. Yeah, sex is very much at the heart of this novel. Sexual taboos are at the heart of this. Kink. I mean, I think you've talked in previous interviews that I've read about how you were kind of girding yourself as you prepared for the publication of this novel for people to just automatically assume that this is autofiction, like thinly veiled. And I get that, like I think sometimes readers make this mistake where they conflate the author with his or her characters in a really reflexive way. And then the author will have to be like, no, this is a novel. I'm working creatively here. But I also know from my experience as a writer that sometimes writers will say that. They'll say, no, this is a novel, when in fact it's actually autofiction, but they're just kind of trying to like create some distance. Can you just talk about the creative courage that it took you to write this book and to write into this subject matter I don't know if you were fearless about it. Maybe that's not the right word, right? There was probably some fear, but you pushed through the fear. Is that the way that you would probably characterize it?
Oh, that's such a beautiful question. Thank you. Fearless is definitely not the right. there was there was a very generous review that just published in the San Francisco Chronicle. I live in San Francisco, and the writer, the wonderful Hannah Bay, used the word fearless, and I saw that and I was like, definitely not fearless.
but courageous, because courage is when you are afraid, but you act in spite of the fear.
Well, thank you for saying that. The experience of writing this book came with what were often daily, sometimes hours long panic attacks and anxiety attacks. It hasn't stopped, even yesterday I was in the depths of what was, I don't even know, like a 5-hour anxiety attack, and I couldn't bring it down. And part of it for me, I've realized, is that, so I think I have three sort of different heaps piled on my body, on my brain, on my heart. And those are that I'm a Korean woman. I'm ex-Catholic and I'm ex-evangelical, and I was so Christian for a while that when I was a kid, my life goal was to be a pastor or like a recluse in a cave. I just wanted to serve the Lord. And then
I remember this from the last time we spoke. We talked about this at length. Like you were like a super believer, and then you lost your faith.
Yes. And it was still and still is the pivotal loss of my life. Like it divides my life into a before and after.
And I should interrupt. I'm sorry, but I want to make sure to point out that your protagonist, Jin, the photographer, has a similar experience, a similar loss of faith that she is dealing with in her life.
Yes, yes, very much so. And what I realized is that, Korean women aren't supposed to talk about sex. Korean women are really not supposed to give any indication in public that we've ever had sex, let alone wanted sex. Catholics famously, being
I was raised
Catholic,
Catholic. I was raised Catholic, just so you know. Yeah.
you know all about it.
Yeah.
Being being ex-Catholic famously comes with its own burden of shame and guilt around physical desires. Being an ex-evangelical, that also comes with its own sort of like fun heap of guilt and shame. And what I think I realized is that I think people think that because of this book that I worked on for 9 years, because I also co-edited an anthology called Kink with my friend Garth Greenwell, I have gotten the sense that people imagine that I must be just like extremely liberated and like that I've like kicked off shame. And it isn't true at all. And I think what I've realized is that I am quite possibly never going to get out from underneath this triple helping of shame and guilt. However, one doesn't have to be liberated to do liberated and liberating things. One doesn't have to be free to do things that reach toward freedom. And I think I believe with all my heart that if I'm afraid to write something down, if something I'm considering writing down kicks off another panic attack, there's probably something there that's really interesting to me. There's probably something there that I want to see written down. And I know this because in some of my loneliest moments, and there have been times in my life when I've thought I could be a decent candidate for being the loneliest person in the world, which I knew I wasn't. I knew I didn't get that crown, but I thought I could at least, like compete for the crown.
Right.
And so I know that in those times, books, other people's books and art have provided genuinely life-saving fellowship. And when I think about why I want to write, I think that's one of the main things for me is I want to give that fellowship, that kinship back to people, because it can be so amazing to read something, to read a passage or a page, and to realize, oh my God, someone else has had this thought. Someone else has wanted something that I thought I was alone on this earth in wanting. And yeah, I really wanted to do that with this book. So I just kept almost trusting. I kept trusting in the fear as a guidepost. It was pointing me toward what I wanted to do next.
Well, I think this is laudable that you wrote into this fear and that you pushed through, because there's an urgency and a vitality to books written by people for whom the project is deeply personal. And I think it would be useful for listeners who have not had a chance to read to talk a little bit about these like private desires of Jin in particular, the photographer. Like, can you just give an overview of what she is discovering about herself as she falls into this relationship with Lydia?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for saying that, Brad. That I'm like going to I'm trying not to tear up here.
This is the Barbara Walters moment of the interview where you have to take a break and blow your nose.
Well, thank you so much for saying that. So Jin is a Korean woman artist. She's queer and she's kinky. She's open about being queer. She has been for a while. She is profoundly not open about the kink. And just as a quick aside, I'll say that because people aren't always sure what it is. One way kink can be defined is simply as any act or practice that steps outside of whatever one's culture tells you that sex is supposed to be. And so it's a shifting term that's defined more by what it's not than by what it is. And by some measures, there's so many studies on this kind of thing, but so one quite comprehensive study, that one of those studies that looked at all kinds of other studies and then pulled together the information. That study said that perhaps 40 to 70% of people are interested in kink in one way or another. And so it's not a fringe thing, but it's treated like a fringe thing. And well, so there's the part. It is true that so Jin is having trouble. Jin has trouble talking about the kink, including to her husband Philip, and let alone anyone else. In part because, again, she's a Korean woman, and really, I cannot overstate the extent to which Korean women we're just not supposed to be sexual beings, not in public, certainly in any way, shape, or form. And then there's Jin shares my background of being ex-religious and ex-fervidly religious. There's also the fact that a large part of what led to kept spurring panic attacks for me and anxiety attacks was that so I've written quite a bit of nonfiction that has to do with gender, race, queerness, etc., including after the 2021 Atlanta spa shootings, when women were killed by a man who said that he did it because they were quote unquote temptations. He explained that his explanation was that he had a sex addiction, which is not considered in which psychiatric literature does not consider to be a real thing. The media,
And wait, let me ask you this. I'm trying to recall this shoot. I mean, it's terrible that I would have to search my brain because there's been so damn many of them. But
is full of massacres and shootings on a regular
yeah,
basis.
but
Yeah.
this was this was the spa shooting in Atlanta, and these were Asian women, were they not?
These were Asian women. These were
Yeah.
Asian women, and the shooter was white, and he told the media like the next day that he had a sex addiction. And people just blithely repeated this until people started pushing back and saying, actually, sex addictions aren't real. They're not recognized by medicine in any way as being a real thing. But so I wrote about that. I wrote about the shootings a few days after they happened. And I then ended up, because of that, going on the radio to talk about some of this. And as a result, I heard from thousands of people, including and predominantly women, about their own experiences of gendered racism. And it was and is. I felt and feel so honored to be able to be trusted with such pain. It's also true that as I was writing this book, I became increasingly terrified, and I still am, that the ways in which sexuality is explored in exhibit, the book can be misinterpreted. Let's see. Jin's desires can be misinterpreted as aligning almost exactly with some of the most harmful and most prevalent stereotypes about people who look like me, which is that we're docile, that we can be pushed around, that we're here to serve, and it's
Well,
codified. And yeah,
I want to interrupt just so people listening are oriented. Like when you talk about the ways in which stereotypes about Asian women might be projected onto Jin based on her desires, we should maybe specify that in terms of her personal kink, she is, I guess, what you call submissive. She likes to be hit in during sex. Is that right?
yeah, she's a submissive. She's submissive, and she's a masochist. So yes, exactly. And then so I just what the fear came down to, I realized, and Jin has this fear too with the work that she starts being interested in making, is I can't say this without tearing up. I keep trying. You can see that it's still like a very present fear for me. The fear is that by making, and it's just a novel, but a novel holds a world. The fear is that I will get more of us killed, that I'll get more of us harmed by adding to the stereotype. And this always happens. I I can't talk about it without. And and yeah, that's just and so Jin shares this fear as well. And that's part of why she can't talk about it, because she doesn't want, especially at first, that changes, but she wishes she didn't want as she does. And one of the obsessions of the book is the strength of desire, the strength of, and that includes multiple kinds of desire. There's ambition, there's a sexual desire for sure, but other kinds of desire, like Philip's desire for a child, Jin's desire to never have a child. I am fascinated by, and as is the book, the extent to which desire can't be argued away. It can't be like it, we like. I mean, at least in my experience of desire is just there, and I have to work with it. It won't. I can't argue it. I can't argue it out of my body. I can't kill it. It's just and so yeah.
It also occurs to me how much desire can make us miserable.
Mm,
Like the things we want. Like I always say, like the best definition of happiness that I've ever heard is to be free from wanting. Like what
mm.
is true happiness? Is to be free from wanting. And yet human beings, we want stuff all the time, like constantly. And it drives us crazy.
We
Doesn't
do.
it?
We do. I feel as though at every given moment of my life I seethe with desire.
Yeah. And then you get it. And then it's like, and that's supposed to sate you, right? That's supposed to, like, if you fulfill your desire, it's supposed to make you happy. And yet you fulfill your desire and then you become anxious about losing it once you have it, which makes you miserable. Like it's like it's like this cycle of constant, it basically just leads to constant dissatisfaction. Somehow I've got to relinquish the wanting.
On the one hand, I know that mm, I know that there, of course, there are religions where that say that the cessation of desire is tied to enlightenment. And I think a lot about how so, for instance, in my dear friend Ingrid Rojas Contreras' memoir, "The Man Who Could Move Clouds," which, if anyone hasn't read it, I'd so recommend. It's an incredible book. Um,
Pulitzer Prize finalist.
Pulitzer Prize finalist, exactly. And her mother is a curandera, a healer who can who and who has well, her whole Ingrid's whole family has a tradition of people being curanderos and curanderas. And something Ingrid's mother says to her in the course of the book, that I think about a lot, is that what the ghosts miss the most is wanting. The ghosts miss desire. The ghosts miss their hunger. And I just feel as though wanting and wanting and wanting is so inextricably tied to my experience of living, at least, that in some ways I find some delight in that, in the ferocity of desire, and in how just how impossible it seems to be for at least me to relax its hold.
I think everybody's that way, right? I mean, it's like on the one hand, it's like to be free from wanting is this ideal where you would imagine it would lead to some sort of peace. But then, like you say, maybe it's the ghosts. It's the very thing that the ghosts miss the most. I mean, maybe it's like not wanting things to be other than they are. So if you, I don't know, it's a
Mm-hmm.
conundrum. Let's just leave it at that, right? It's a human conundrum, and I
Mm-hmm.
think it affects us all in various ways. And for Jin, she has these desires for Lydia. She has these like sexual desires within the context of their relationship that are taboo and that have so many different associations for her. And there's something revelatory about it. There's something a little bit risky when you think about, as you said, being a Korean woman coming from a religious background, having certain expectations placed upon you in both contexts, and kind of rebelling against that. I know that I want to say you either gave a speech or wrote an essay about kind of not wanting your parents to read this book. um, can you talk about that? Because I think this is something that a lot of writers and artists face, where the art that we make might not be the art that, say, our parents or our pastor would want us to make. Like, how have you dealt with the weight of that and navigated the relationships that might be affected by the art?
So I should probably say here that I'm queer, and I'm open about it. I've written about it. I've talked in interviews about it. Being queer for a whole lot of both mainland and diasporic Koreans is still considered an illness, and some sort. It's considered a strange illness that seems to affect other people but does not affect Koreans. And so, and so I think in 2018 is when I started talking in public about being queer. And my parents, I'm very close to them, and my mother is adorably, she's on Instagram, and she not only hearts every single post I put up, but throws in a bunch of emojis. She's very fluent in emojis. She throws in a bunch of emojis. My father just, like, for kicks, will Google me just to see like what interviews or publications might be out. And so they're very supportive, which I'm so grateful for. For 5 years, anytime I posted or said anything about being queer, those would be the posts that my mother would just skip. And we never talked about it. And honestly, that was completely fine to me. Sort of a benign silence was completely fine to me. They're very religious. They're very Catholic. They're Korean immigrants. I just thought there's only so much that they can do on this front, and that's totally fine. But then in 2023, my first novel, The Incendiaries, it published in Korea. And I was very fortunate in that my publisher, Munji, we had a lot of press. And so my father was so proud, he was emailing like his high school alumni, college alumni, church friends, telling them all about how the book's now out in Korean. They listened to and read every single interview. Along with that pride, it was also true that the first thing that they said to me after listening to and reading interviews was that they proposed I stop talking about being queer. And they said that it was because other people, elders, had expressed grave concern. And they framed it in they used the argument that people often use, that it's not safe. And it's true that in Korea, being queer, I mean, of course, like, being queer here can also be very fraught. In Korea, there are no legal protections. At the annual Seoul Pride Parade, there's a tradition of Christian protesters trying to die by suicide by flinging themselves in front of floats, to stop the parade, to die for the Lord. I'm just laughing because this is just so, like, typical of Korea. I just feel as though, like, Koreans are just the deeply not chill people we just take something and we're
They're like,
like,
hey guys, it's a parade. Relax.
and so so they weren't wrong, my parents, that I was running a risk by talking about queerness which I did in every single interview I gave. But that said, that's part of why I did it, right? Because I don't live in Korea. I live in San Francisco, for heaven's sake. And mm, but that the Korean attitude, and I don't want to speak for everybody, it's changing, thank goodness. But it's changing, not as quickly as it should, but it is changing. But the overall Korean attitude toward queerness is something that I've had on my mind very much while writing this book. Recently, I was trying to think about how many queer Korean writers I know who are out. And to my surprise, because I hadn't actually thought, like, I hadn't like made a list before, and including diasporic and mainland Koreans, there were so few that I could think of. At first I struggled to even get to 10, and then I got past 10. But it took thinking. I was actually like texting friends and saying like, who else do we know of? And so there's to be queer in Korean is can be complicated. I mean, again, complicated for so many people. There's such a thing as social death, is what it's called. And so, social death is what happens is if you come out as being queer, and if your family disapproves, if the people around you disapprove, everyone just stops talking to you. You stop existing to the people around you, and so that's terrifying. That's a terrifying thing to contemplate. And yeah, so
and,
that
and
that
yet it hasn't stopped you.
well, on the queerness aspect, again, I live in San Francisco. Most of my friends are writers and editors and artists. I know so many queer people that, especially in San Francisco, that when I meet a new person here, I don't, I default tend to assume that the new person is probably queer. It's almost as though people are queer until proven otherwise to me. Like if someone just comes out and says straight up, like, I am a heterosexual person, they're just like, oh, okay, all right, that's a straight person. But so I kind of felt as though. mm because I started talking in public about being queer in late 2018. So that was some months after the Incendiaries published. And I thought, there are so few of us who are out for any number of reasons. And I live in San Francisco again. And my parents are very religious. However, they were definitely not going to disown me. So that meant it means I have a lot of safety around this that a lot of people don't. So I thought I really, and I don't mean this. This doesn't apply to anyone else. It's always a personal decision. But for me personally, I thought like, well, I can talk about being queer in public. It's relatively quite safe for me, and so I want to, and I should then.
Yeah, I think that's a really noble thing to do. And I'm imagining you probably hear from people who might not be living out in the open, but who find comfort in your living openly and kind of speaking your truth. Is that the case? Do you hear from people?
I do hear a lot from people who, especially from people who. So I go by, I use both terms. I don't. I like both terms, but I'm bisexual slash pansexual. And I use both terms because I think pansexual might be this slightly more accurate in that gender is irrelevant to me in terms of attraction. Whereas to be bisexual is to be attracted to two or more genders. But I also use bisexual because it's the more embattled term, I think. That one of the standing myths about bisexual people is that we just don't exist. So,
Right,
um,
right. It's
you know,
always like, oh, you're gay, you just don't realize it yet, or you won't
exactly,
admit it. Yeah.
exactly. I'm just like, well, no, some of us are bisexual. Leave us alone. But and I'm married to a man. I'm married to a cis man. And I think because that was partly why I didn't talk about it for a while, because there can be it's for bisexual slash pansexual people who are in heterosexual appearing partnerships. There can be a pressure to not talk about it because it doesn't look as though you're queer. But then I started talking about it, and I hear so much from other queer people who are in heterosexual appearing relationships, who will just say, I mean, people send me messages a lot. So many friends at parties, at dinner parties, have just said as an aside, "Oh, by the way, I'm queer too. I just don't talk about it because it looks as though I'm heterosexual."
Yeah, I mean, that is a unique like iteration of it, right? Where you are in this like seemingly heteronormative presenting relationship, and yet you're queer. And so, what would be the impetus to speak about it? I guess you're a public facing person as an artist, but for somebody who isn't, I can imagine how they could be like, yeah, it's more trouble than it's worth, or I'm just going to keep it to myself. And
Yeah.
yet, to keep it to yourself can be its own kind of burden, to not be able to just be transparent about who you are and to speak openly can become problematic.
Yeah, and so much loneliness can come with that, and having to hide a part of yourself that's core to who you are. There's so much loneliness that can come with that. Something I think a lot about is I think when people are pressured to hide or kill core desires, and definitely to suppress or kill core desires. That can be a first violence from which other kinds of violence can arise, and an example I'll give is just like the cliched figure of somebody who is extremely anti-queer, and you find out that they've been a closeted queer person all along the way, and yeah, so I think with Exhibit, I the characters the central characters are trying very hard, and with varying degrees of achieving what they hope to do, are trying very hard to move out of hiding, to move toward openness.
Well, let's speak about infuriation because we've spoke about panic attacks and fear, and we've talked about pushing through the fear. And I think there is a detectable and righteous anger in you and in this work. It's like a defiance. Is that an accurate assessment? I mean, do you feel that and do you recognize that within yourself as somebody who, kind of grew up within these confining, like
Mm,
religious and social and cultural structures, and you've kind of managed to break out, or you're trying to break out in your art and in your life?
mm.
Is anger a fuel? Is it a part of the equation for you?
Um, I've joked, and it's not quite a joke, that when there's nothing else left to fuel me, in times of great sorrow, in times of great dejection, when there's nothing left, there is almost spite is the most dependable fuel. I thought about that during the early part of the pandemic, when there were times when things were so grim, and I thought, I absolutely cannot get this virus and die, because I must outlive the evil fuckers in charge. I must live long enough to see them die.
Hey, it's good to have goals.
It's good to have goals. Good goals are good. No, but I'm always grateful to. In some ways, I'm always grateful to. I have found that in times of great sorrow, that in times of great melancholy, that when anger kicks in, I'm grateful to it because it's energy. It lets me do something. Then anger seems like something that I can work with, whereas sorrow kind of like shuts me down, closes me inside. And yeah, I guess there is also some there is also some anger about with the terrible anxiety I felt about this book and still feel. And again, there, and then I so often try to mock the anxiety away, but that doesn't seem to work. And I just, because it's a book, right? Like, it's a novel. I made it up. Nobody made me do this. Like, nobody forced me to write a book about this. I could have written about whatever I wanted, and instead I chose to write about things that have filled me with alarm on a near daily basis. And it is true that sometimes I'll think, but this isn't fair. Why do I have to be so afraid about writing a book that has to do with women's desire? Like, what? And yeah, so I'd say yes.
Yeah, it's like a yo-yoing. It's like a yo-yoing between like fear and defiance. And like the defiance has won out, right? The book is in print. You decided not to let fear like rule the day, right?
Well, I guess, God, every day, almost every day that I wrote this book, I told myself often out loud that it was okay because I could write things down because I wasn't going to let anyone read it. And I knew it was I knew it was a lie. For one thing, at some point I had sold the book to Riverhead, so to my editor. So there was, at some point I was going to have to send them something. But I'm still kind of holding on to that lie. And we're now, what's the date? 5 days from publication. And so the book has been shipped to bookstores. So I'm aware that the lie is about to completely fall to nothing. But I'm still holding on to it, and I'm not sure what I'm going to do when once the lie is no longer, once there's nothing of it left. But yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the writing itself. I'm going to quote you to yourself, if I may. I read something, I think, where you say, my ideal schedule involves going to sleep close to dawn, like around 6 or 7 a.m., then waking up at around noon or so. I have a somewhat metal, as in like heavy metal, morning routine. I take half a caffeine pill, and then I keep my laptop near my bed, so I just roll over and grab it and wait for the caffeine to kick in. I listen to music that I only ever listen to when I'm writing. This is it. You literally like roll over, grab a caffeine pill and your laptop, and you don't even get out of bed. And
Yes.
you go to bed at dawn.
Yeah, that's another way I listen to my body is I'm really nocturnal. I can actually kind of feel my brain get a little like pick up speed when the sun goes down. I feel much more at home at night. I have read that it's quite possible that because there is a percentage of the population that is just definitely nocturnal, and it shortens our lives to try to adhere to the morning schedule that the world sets for everybody. And I've read that it's possible that some of us evolved to be extremely nocturnal because we were needed to watch out for our communities at night. So,
Yeah.
so, so we kept the species going.
Well,
Has been my
I
true
think
belief.
that there's absolutely truth to it. I have a friend who's that way. My brother-in-law is that way. It's very obvious that you're just wired up for this schedule, in ways that I'm certainly not. And I want to say that my friend did like a ancestry.com or 23andMe, like did some sort of genetic test on himself, and
Yeah.
that there's actually a genetic indicator for this.
Whoa! I did not know that. Fascinating.
Yeah, I want to say, I could be wrong, but I want to say he told me, he's like, yeah, it's very obvious that I'm, I've got the nocturnal genetic indicator or whatever. So I don't know. It's a totally real thing. I think that it's also like you're inherently oppressed as a nocturnal person by the mainstream schedule, right? Like you say, like if you're wired this way, but you're forced to live a 9 to 5 existence and your body is resistant to going to bed at 10 o'clock at night, waking up at 6 in the morning, and the whole thing seems upside down to you, you probably don't get as good a sleep, and that can affect your health.
Yeah, it's so true. I At this point, usually if I have like a 9 a.m. meeting and it has to be at 9 a.m., I often just approach it from the other side. Like I'll just stay up and then take the 9 a.m. meeting and then I'll go to sleep after that because that feels better to my body than trying to drag myself out of bed at 8:30 in the morning. And yeah, and the reason I do this whole caffeine pill grab my laptop, don't get out of bed thing, is that I just want to get as fast as possible from my dreaming state into the writing, into trying to write. And I find that that helps cut down meaningfully on the real fear that seems to come with starting to write every single day. Just the fear that the writing won't go well, that it won't, that the words won't come, that I'll spend that time just banging my head against the manuscript. And even getting up to make coffee, for instance, and I love delicious coffee, but Even
I was gonna say, you're taking a pill. Like, whatever happened to coffee?
I love coffee, but that requires getting up and making it. And so that widens the interval between dream state and writing state. And so I wait for coffee until later in the day after I've, with any luck, gotten some writing done.
Well,
And
how long does a caffeine pill take to kick in?
it's pretty fast. I haven't measured it honestly, but it's pretty much the same as coffee. It hits you fast.
Especially if you crush it up and snort it, I hear. So I don't know.
I have not yet tried that.
You're not there yet. You're not there yet. You're
Not
freebasing caffeine pills in your bed in the morning.
serious.
And I read too that you also have a writing shawl. Like
I
you wear
do.
you drape yourself in a particular shawl for the act of writing.
I do. And this is also influenced by my friend Ingrid Rojas Contreras.
Who has guested on this program multiple times?
Yes. So she has she's written in the New York Times about this. She has a very she has writing rituals that include she has a certain color, ultramarine blue, that she only ever wears when she's writing. And so she's bought like these clothes that are in ultramarine blue, but she'll only wear them when writing. And when she's in, and then she also has, any number of other rituals that are only for the writing. And then
I'm trying to picture ultramarine blue. I guess it's like a oceanic, deep, like sea blue. Like, what is it?
I've actually never seen it on her because it's her writing.
Right,
It's her
right.
writing clothes. So I've never seen any of her writing clothes. And so I adapted that. And I only wear black. I only have black clothes just for me. At some point, I decided to cut down on the number of decisions I make in a given day, and just wearing all black made freed up space to think about other things for me. But I adapted that to having a writing shawl. So there's a shawl that I only ever wear if I'm writing fiction. And when that shawl is on me or visible, I will not answer texts. I definitely won't look at email. Absolutely won't look at social media or news. And what I've found and I have a mug that's only for writing fiction. I have certain lighting that's only for writing fiction. I have music that I only listen to when I'm writing fiction. And what
Like
I've
what is the music that you listen to?
The music varies wildly. I usually loop one or two songs at a time, and it varies wildly. Sometimes it can be I have a fondness for late Renaissance music, religious music. Sometimes it could just be a contemporary pop song that I'm interested in the moment. Tracy Chapman's "Fast Car" has been a reliable writing song. It's all over the place. But what I've found, and Ingrid said this would be the case, is once these rituals are in place, very soon I lose the ability or not the ability, I lose the desire to spoil that space, that writing space. It starts feeling as though you're on holy ground, and one doesn't want to defile one's own holy ground. And so I used to use programs like any number of computer programs to lock off the internet because I could not keep myself off of the internet. I wanted to know what was going on in the world. And when I have my rituals in place, I lose the desire to even, like go on Instagram and see what people are up to, and so it's been so helpful. I can't say enough about how helpful the rituals have been. It really does feel almost like a refuge. Once I have that in place, I mean, even though writing is a process fraught with all kinds of emotions that are not always enjoyable. I know that I'm going to be thinking about the fiction, and I do want to say because I count lying on my back staring at the ceilings as writing time. Like I count stretching as writing time. Like all of that is writing to me. But this has helped so much actually that at some point I realized, and I can't believe it took me like years to figure this out, but it used to be the case that when I was writing essays, that I had it was what I would usually do is I would start working at something like 10 p.m. and I would pour myself a glass of wine, start start slowly drinking it. I would then spend hours wandering around in the wilderness of the internet, you reading about something that had absolutely nothing to do with what I was supposed to be doing. I would end up reading just something awful, like I don't know. I would end up reading about incels for hours instead of working on my essay and getting myself into a state of
Who
a
among
state of
us
sorrow
hasn't
and
spent
rage.
hours reading about incels?
Yeah,
nothing,
it's not.
nothing,
It's not.
nothing relaxes me more. Nothing relaxes me more than a nice glass of Malbec and a great essay on incels. It's just
Right,
how I
exactly.
wind. It's how I like to wind down.
Exactly. It was not relaxing. And then roughly around somehow my body seems to know exactly how long drafting an essay will take. So often around 5 a.m. is when I would actually get going on the essay. So then by that point, I've been slowly sipping wine for 7 hours. And then I would, finish a draft by 10 a.m. maybe. And then usually I have a friend or two read it before and then I redraft it before I send it to anyone else, to an editor. And so then I would send it off to the friends I'd recruited to read the essay. And then I would fling myself into bed, at this point just drunk because, I've been drinking for a solid 12 hours, very slowly, very slowly. But it was like the most unhealthy essay writing habit I could imagine. Like it just felt like I was permanently in grad school. And then one day I realized I could just have an essay shawl. I could have a shawl that's devoted. I could have a mug that's devoted to essays. I could have lighting that's devoted to essays, music that's devoted to essays. And that has dramatically changed my relationship to writing essays. Now there's haven't read about incels in a while. Thank
Oh
God.
my! This is revolutionary. You have a shawl for every genre. Whatever you're
Yes.
doing. But
Yes.
that it just makes a basic sense to, especially if you're having trouble concentrating, to just sort of dot all your I's, cross all your T's, take care of your environment, your physical self, and make a ritual out of it. And it seems to work. I get why it would. And on a semi-related note, I have to ask you about powerlifting. I guess this isn't part of your writing practice, but I'm imagining it does feed it. I talk to so many writers on this show who have some relationship with physical activity
Mm,
that feeds or serves as a counterpoint to the more inert, static, writing work.
mm,
But powerlifting,
mm.
I have not heard that many write. I don't think I've ever had a conversation with a writer on this show about powerlifting. This is something you do regularly, and does it affect you creatively?
Um, So I love powerlifting, and my friend Tony Tulatamuti is the one who recommended that I try it out. So that's another writer powerlifter.
He's been
So
he's been on this show. I don't think we talked about powerlifting. Maybe he's taken it up. It's been a minute. It was several years ago, so maybe he's taken it up since then, or he didn't. We just didn't,
I
talk
think
about
it's
it.
since he wrote his since he published his last book that he started getting into it. So what powerlifting offers is something that I otherwise can find only when the writing is going really, really well, which is when I'm trying to deadlift something, I'm and I every time I do it, I try to get to a place where I'm lifting as much as I possibly can. And it's a little dangerous. Not like it's not super dangerous, but it is dangerous. You can, if you do it badly, if your form is off, you can really hurt yourself. And so while I'm lifting something that I can barely lift, my brain has to think about just that. There's nothing else I'm thinking about in that moment. And that feels analogous to when I'm writing, and the writing is going really well. And when I'm just deep inside a sentence and just trying to get it to be the most truthful version of itself that it can possibly be. It's not just that I'm not thinking about anything else. Like it feels very much as though I'm gone. Like the ego dissolves. There's some sense in which I forget I have a body. I'm just in the sentence, and it is one of the most ecstatic things I know, is being able to enter that space. And granted, like it's not always available. Sometimes like weeks can go by without getting to that space, but but then it, knock on wood, it so far has come back. and so powerlifting is it's different, but similarly it lets me focus on just one thing, and I find that to be so useful in part because every other way I have of relaxing or taking a break from the writing still involves thinking about the writing, you know? So reading for sure, watching a film or a show, engaging in any of the, like going to a museum, watching the ballet, even talking with friends. There, it's very hard to not always be thinking about the writing at the same time in one way or another, for something to remind me of the writing, to have to write something down. And when I'm powerlifting, I am not thinking about the writing. And it's so nice. Would
Yeah.
recommend.
And then there's also got to be like the endorphins that happen after you've done a session. What do you call it? A powerlifting session? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, you call it a session. You could just, yeah.
Okay. I just want to make sure I get the terminology right. But, you know, it's like that. It's like it wipes the hard drive clean, or it just gives you some free, you know, some freedom
Oh
from the
God.
static of your mind. And then you get the rush of endorphins. I totally get that. I don't know how anybody lives without that, like some version of it. It doesn't have to be powerlifting, but you've got to have something. And it's also, I've read, I want to say, like powerlifting is sort of having a moment. Like it's really good for your health to lift like to your threshold, right? Like I keep seeing this being recommended as like a healthy activity, good for your long-term health.
It's really good for your health. It's really good for your bones. It's just yeah, and it feels great. Honestly, it makes me feel so powerful in the moment when I'm lifting at the very threshold of what I'm capable of doing. You know, I've thought a lot about how, I'm not sure how scientific this is, but I read somewhere that the rates of depression and anxiety among writers tends to be, I don't know if this is true, but I'm just going to say it, tends to be meaningfully higher than among visual artists. And I've wondered why. And one friend said, and you know, friends have you know, I've noticed this, that like at artist residencies and places that the visual artists just seem to be a little bit less glum than the than the writers tend to be. And I wonder if, and this was my friend's idea, I wonder if it's because visual artists move around so much more than we do. You know, it's very easy for a writer to just sit at their desk for hours and hours and never move a muscle except to maybe get some water and some food. And our bodies aren't supposed to do this. Our bodies are built for moving around. And so yeah,
That's,
whatever we can do to.
and you do this at a gym. You don't have like a setup at your house or your apartment.
No, I wish I did. That would be great. But the gym I go to is really close by. And because yeah, the weights are so massive that they wouldn't fit in my San Francisco apartment by any means.
I was going to say you would have to have a pretty cool apartment if you've got like a powerlifting, you know, a powerlifting room. This is my, do you have a powerlifting shawl or no? Do you have like your own, like,
I don't.
that would be pretty badass if you did though. Show up in your, you know, fuchsia shawl for powerlifting. uh, so, but is this, and I'm just asking out of curiosity, it's just called powerlifting. What's the name of the other cross? No, it's not cross training, but it's,
CrossFit.
there's like CrossFit. Is it CrossFit that you're doing or is it just powerlifting?
No, I think I would really like CrossFit, but I haven't tried it in part because well, once when I was in the ER with the rock climbing injury, which was what I used to love to do, and I stopped because I just kept spraining my ankle, and at some point I was like, "This is ridiculous. I can't keep wandering around on crutches." But when I went to the ER with one of several of the climbing injuries that I ended up having, the doctor shook his head and he said, "You bouldering people," because I would boulder, which means you don't climb with a rope. You bouldering people are just as bad as the CrossFitters. You're here every single week, and and so yeah, CrossFitting, people who CrossFit, it's an activity that is especially prone to injury. But it looks so fun. I really want to do it. But yeah.
Well, congratulations to you. I always ask, as I did the last time we spoke, if there's anything else in the pipeline. Are you working on another book or are you just celebrating this one?
I've been trying very hard to work on. I did get. I've started working on the next novel, and I, it's not even that I'm in cage. It's just that I'm not sure what it is yet. But the way Exhibit exists in the same universe as the Incendiaries. So they're very loosely connected, and there's a little bit of overlap. I think the next book also exists in the same universe, and I think it's quite possible that Jin Han's my narrator's photos are going to show up in the next book. And I think I might be working toward either a trilogy, a triptych, or a quartet of books that are loosely connected and have some overlapping obsessions and motifs.
Okay. Well, we will look forward to it. Congratulations to you, and thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me.
Oh, of course. Thank you so much. Thank you.